Hello, I'm going to be presenting my commentary on about my first half hour of trying out No Plan B, why it's in a pre-alpha state, and I do understand that the developer is working very hard and that the game is not a finished product. I'm just commenting on what I could play and giving my feedback. And I think an important part of feedback is explaining biases and where the player is coming from. So on the real life side of things, I've had a very big background in tactical shooting, over maybe 500, 600 hours of formal training and many more years of informal training. Shoot a lot of competition, carried a lot of that into my career in the Army. And in the Army, I worked with explosives as an explosive ordnance disposal technician. So I have a little bit better understanding of basic military explosives than most people would. And with that, I'm just going to hit play on my video now. And I'll just be commenting alongside. I'm not playing live. Nice to see that, made with the Unity thing here. I know a little bit about Unity, so I was able to understand where some of the constructs in the game were coming from. I did play this the same way I would play mini games, where I don't always pay attention to tutorial material, but I try to give a look to the UI to see, what is the developer trying to explain to the player in order to get them in, but sometimes I just like jumping into games and playing as I see them. So if there's too much text or too much stuff on the screen, I just kind of jump in and see what I can find out on my own, sometimes to my own detriment. But for the most part, I'm following the instructions here and just trying to understand what it is that the tutorial wants to teach me, which seemed like a basic movement thing. And I took this opportunity to just, follow the instructions and see how the controls worked. And at first I was like, man, top down, that's kind of weird, because I saw someone else play the game and it was not a top-down directive. I started playing around with the camera angles later. And the other thing I immediately noticed once I started doing more advanced movement was that movement is done on a bit of a grid. There are little points that the character walks through, and you'll see me push my mouse around as if I'm trying to fight that. And I think that just comes from playing a little bit too much door kickers. I'll be referencing door kickers not as a direct comparison of what this game should be, just because that's a game I put a lot of time on, and that's honestly going to come through with what my experience is. I'm just like trying to do things that I'm used to in door kickers. And here I am just messing around with the, the video timeline control system. That is a big part of the game, since, you just start a plan and you let it play through, which is the way that I like to play door kickers as well. Here just playing with the way the directive is and seeing like what kind of wacky stuff I can make the character do, because I just wanted to know if things worked. I also wanted to see if anything would break, since the game is in such a state. I thought that would be quite useful. So obviously I figured out the zoom controls, so I thought those were pretty intuitive, just to, drag the screen and rub it around. And this is where I started trying to fight the gridded movement system to see if I could kind of make the character do smooth turns and curves before I start going to more advanced missions. Even though this is just a tutorial, I wanted to play around with it. And then noticing that I could kind of skip to the end of my plan just by putting the timeline there and hitting play. That's not exactly what I wanted to do, but it helped me understand, like, oh, this is me playing a video of what would happen, not me playing the mission. I still have to do that from the beginning. That became very apparent to me here. I just didn't realize it earlier, and hey, that's why tutorials exist. I think it did a good job of presenting an environment where I could do that. But as far as tutorials go, I think it's very straightforward as far as getting the player the basics of understanding what, the game is supposed to be and how to be successful at it. And here I was like, oh, good, targets. I get to see what the shooting is like. I was very interested to see what the audio is like, so I checked my graphics and audio settings for a moment just to make sure like I was going to get the full experience. I also noticed that on Twitter, someone said, maybe it was Twitter or Reddit, someone said they were crashing at certain settings, so I want to check mine. I'm completely maxed out and wasn't having any problems, but I figured I should stay maxed out to see if problems would occur. And here I am just trying to see how the cornering is going to work. I was really interested to see how that cone of vision would work, and I think it looks appropriate for what it is, and by the time you have a character exposed is the time that they can see, and I think that's going to be very nice for, what a tactical focus game is, that there is no like invisible ability to see through a wall. Once you're coming on a corner, you're in there. and you own it, and you can get there by getting close to it, or you can get there by bounding out of it. I also noticed this whole, not just setting directions for a character to look in, which is what I'm used to, or accustomed to from door kickers, but setting an actual target. I didn't realize that it was locking on to the point I was putting on, and that I could set that point as potential targets. And I don't know if the game is going to include modes where, you know, you don't know how many targets are coming up, but I imagine if it does, then the target lock-on is not going to be as important as is the zones. Also, another thing I noticed was just, I was kind of impressed by the smoothness of the 3D character model, as well as the shotgun handling, arm straight out forward, unlike our little GIF lady here. Good control of the recoil. Having played door kickers in a, you know, top-down 2D environment, it's kind of hard. They really wanted to express some of that, like modern ways of controlling weapons. But, you know, that's hard to do with the amount of graphics that were available to them. So I was just trying to see what the game offered, and I was quite impressed. And here I was just replaying the same mission over and over because I just wanted to see what the game had to offer me. Swapping out weapons and resources because I wanted to say, like, hey, if I wanted to take this with a different kind of tactic, what could I do? And so I figured I'd try a submachine gun. I have to be honest, I did not pay attention to the stats, but I later did pay attention to what the descriptions were. But again, the way that I like to experience stuff is to just put it in the game, see what it does, and that is my learning. I did find a little bit of trouble with the collision for throwing flashbangs and other grenades when it comes to corners, and I know some of that has got to be intentional because, you know, you have to be in a certain position that you're not going to bounce something off, or you have to reach your hand around an area. It wasn't a big issue now, but it became a little bit troublesome later. I'll try to remember to point that out. And then here I'm just doing what I would do in Ewing out a character and having them focusing towards the unknown target, and then I'm just playing around with the smoke grenade because I wanted to see the effects, and I was still learning what the game's controls did in terms of the timeline feature, even without being explained, like the freeze with syncing characters yet. So I was kind of delighted to learn that. So yeah, just tracing back my steps, seeing how the plan is going to go. And one of the things I was interested in, I was like, oh, this will actually show the effect of the flashbang and the effect on the character in smoke, showing that, oh, I'm not visible. I misunderstood how that works for a game, but I understand it now. I'll get to that later as well. Very, very nice visual flashbang effect, I think so. One of the things I've noticed from a few indie games is that they will put a very realistic, high-frequency pitch noise for flashbangs, and it is actually painful to some people. I remember when door kickers did that, they posted on Lightfighter, and Lightfighter, the website, people suggested, hey, yeah, you can make it sound realistic, but don't use the actual tones. That's just hurting people. So a little realistic for its own good. In this case, though, I thought it was fine. It doesn't need much tweaking. Just a toned down frag grenade noise. It's fine. It can be different, but as long as it's not painful to the player, I think that's what I was focused on. Here I just wanted to see like how much detail I could see in the smoke and the character model. Again, I was impressed with this, and I thought the selective, yeah, a little bit of glyph at the wall there. The outer wall, not so much, of course, but I thought this selective bit of showing the player, from my perspective as the overhead, like God mode, looking through certain walls as I get to certain positions with the camera. Very nice touch, allowing me to see detail. And here I just wanted to see if that grenade would disappear off the character model, which I believe it did. And I get a UI indicator of that, as well as I get to see it on the player, so that was kind of cool. And then I just wanted to see, you know, dude shooting through his hand a little bit, so hand position's probably the same as the shotgun. But that's okay. That's, you know, easy to clean up later on, or maybe not at all and not have anyone notice. And then here I was just kind of marveling at the smoke effect and seeing what happened. Propagation of smoke, it almost looks like a 2D effect that's being thrown into the 3D plane, like it's always facing the camera. I may be wrong about that, but either way, I think it looks fine for what it is, and it actually does obscure. Smoke where you pretend to be obscured, say in, shoot, some of the other tactical games, mid-2000s stuff, versus smoke that actually keeps you from seeing things, say, Splinter Cell, Full Spectrum Warrior, games like that. I think that's a big deal for these kinds of games. And no, they're not active. This isn't an active FPS where you need smoke to know that it's, hey, you're not seeing that. And so the UI helps a lot. Now here, I tried out what is, looks like kind of a AR-ish / M4-ish. And I have to say, I pulled in a lot of my personal bias of how I expect an AR to work. I'm like, yo, perfect weapon for close quarters, and perfect weapon for, you know, putting down quote-unquote bad guys in a quicker manner due to the caliber. However, what I didn't realize was that, yeah, the game is treating the weapon as, hey, this is a rifle, quote-unquote rifle, and nothing else. Even though it says assault rifle, it's like, yo, it's going to take a long time to aim, but you can get to longer distance in your submachine gun and shotgun. Well, I don't agree with that, like, completely IRL. For a game, I find that to be a much, much simpler choice than having a bunch of different assault rifles and submachine guns and then having their super realistic strengths and weaknesses displayed. Reason being is usually a game like that, Door Kickers, a lot of the Rainbow Sixes, you know, pre-siege days, you end up with a bunch of weapons that will not be used because there are obviously stronger ones that are used a certain way for a reason. Oh, and also here in the game, I was just playing with the frag grenades. So I don't mind the rifle being the weapon that is, hey, this is going to be longer to aim for longer distances, but it'll be precise when you do fire it. I do not mind, like, kind of simplifying those weapon types just so that it's more of a rock, paper, scissors affair than a, hey, do you know all of your weapons and tactics based around those weapons affair, IRL? Because otherwise, you know, then there's no reason to use anything else if there aren't clear advantages and disadvantages to a weapon. So I don't mind those things being, you know, watered down a little bit for gameplay. What I was very intrigued by there and why I kept rewinding that was that the grenade is actually shown going off in the fast forward and the replay of the timeline. And I was also surprised that you could replay the target going down, and that was something you could actually simulate along the timeline. Whereas the flashbang, as I learned, once actual enemy character models are introduced and not just targets, there's an effect UI that pops up over the enemies, much as there's the unseen icon that popped up over the smoke. I had some difficulty with this particular tutorial, and it's nothing to do with the way the tutorial is built. I think it's fine, just showing like, hey, here's how you start opening doors. Here's a double door. So it's like one problem at a time that you introduce your character or your player to, and say, hey, here's what you can do with a door. You have grenade options, you have silent breaching options, you have dynamic breach options. Like, okay, that's cool. What I didn't like about this, or maybe not like, but what I had trouble with is I'm here looking at, oh, this is my first kind of complex structure. I have a center fed room going into a corner or slightly corner fed room, and I just wanted to say, hey, can I use the tactics that I know and love to traverse and negotiate these obstacles? So I just started playing around with her, and I did not realize that while I was making this intricate plan that there was a rather short time limit for this particular stage. So I started resetting this one over and over again until I got it to the point that I could actually pass the tutorial. But I did want more time to play around in this, and hey, that's just one tutorial mission, which there are definitely other missions that give you time to plan around and do as much as you want. I just wanted to explain why it looks like I'm fumbling around here. And then I did have trouble. I understand more now that I can reach back in the timeline and choose which moves that I am altering. I had trouble understanding that from the onset, and I wanted to do it based off the path and where my character was at the time. I see I'm trying to get him like visual angles, like say what orientation I want him in. But I would often reach back to a line and accidentally delete because I didn't realize that I wasn't just rewriting that point in time, I was rewriting all points past that time. And here I just wanted to play around more with the camera. Oh, I did notice that the zoom, which is tied to the mouse wheel, very natural location for it to be. I did not look and see if there were other zoom controls. What I do know is that while I enjoy the precision, I would have liked a little bit of acceleration when it comes to zooming in. Like, hey, if you go over 3 clicks in a certain number of milliseconds from the mouse wheel, maybe just go ahead and accelerate that to zoom them in faster or zoom them out faster, depending on which direction. I found myself zooming in and out quite a bit, but I understand why it would be scaled with so much granularity, would be to give the player a bit more control over their viewing angles. And, you know, that is something that I think we kind of need from a modern top-down tactics games like this, is yeah, it does need to be in 3D so we can at least see models, and then not just some angled, Resident Evil style of approach. Give them the full camera control. Similar to Full Spectrum Warrior, but, with actual God mode and not just tied to where your characters are. Makes more sense. That makes more sense in, like, outdoor environments and such. Now here, if we talk again about the gridded pattern, what I was trying to do was, like, classic button hook. Just getting this guy into the unknown corner. And while I would have liked to see smoother movement, like I'd like to be able to actually punch him into a U or go directly from the door straight back off of it as if it was something bouncing from the door jamb towards the opposite wall. I did understand why the gridded system was there. The other thing I did not notice, if this was and I don't know if this is a consideration or not, I know in door kickers, one of the, and again this is back to the whole, do you simplify your weapons or do you complicate them thing? Back in door kickers, one of the choices you made between pistols, rifles, shotguns, submachine guns was how easy it was to walk in and out of a doorway with it and lower or raise that weapon. And obviously if we did something like that, there would have to be some indicator that the weapon is not up. I'm sure the UI would be able to take care of that. But I don't know if that's going to be a consideration for this, considering the not as many weapon types, because at a certain point you have to like kind of say, how much do I want to get into this? So this is the point where I realize like I'm not meeting the time limit, so I'm just going to try to point my guy in the right direction, take down the target and escape, and that doesn't really work out for me. Probably would have worked if I'd utilized the shotgun, but again at this point I'm basing this off my personal bias. I'm like, obviously a rifle is the better weapon, and let me just get this guy to the exit. 3 or 4 rifle shots, that guy will be down, and obviously that did not happen. So I don't think there's anything wrong with this layout. I just didn't understand that I was supposed to be doing this a certain amount of time. I think eventually I give up on this and I just throw a fragmentation grenade and call it good, but I don't even know if I tried it with the shotgun. So I give away to tactics and I just start going around, and I accept like, hey, this isn't the tutorial mission for me to play around in. This is the one where I just follow directions and go straight through. And so again, at this point, anything post-blast of the grenade is shown actually down in the simulation. And that's interesting to say like, hey, what information am I giving the player about what worked? Whereas, I don't have that same feedback before actually running the mission if I just plan to shoot in that direction, knowing that my guy is going to leave. And again, that might be some of the bias that I'm bringing from door kickers, knowing that my guy, if he has a target in sight, he's not going to break contact with it until that target is down. And then he will move on with his path. So I think that was probably me not thinking, okay, I need to give him time enough to shoot. That was me assuming he would stay there and keep shooting until the target was down. And hey, this way actually gives more control to the player, that I just had to realize what to do. Here's where I start to have a little bit of trouble with being on a certain angle and understanding where grenades bounce. I understand part of that is definitely intentional. You can't just throw a grenade in a perfect U from behind you. But I did notice like I was having a little bit of trouble of understanding where the grenade would go at this point. I was like, why is it bouncing so hard? How close can I get to a door while leaning my arm around? It just looked a little rough, but I think that's something I would get used to playing more. And again, the grenade simulation of showing what is and isn't going to be knocked down. Very simple model of just an AoE effect with lesser effect and the not as bright red outer parts of the circle. Makes perfect sense to me. Better than going with a more advanced and complicated fragmentation model. Especially when it comes to, hey, I want the player to be able to use these without hurting themselves all the time and getting frustrated. We've seen modern MLG games, recent times, that fragmentation grenades, or at least certain features of fragmentation grenades, get completely removed from a game just because they couldn't make a way to keep the players happy with it. So I think at this point I just wanted to play around with more weapons. That was the first time I actually read the assault rifle description. I was like, oh, I cannot use it the way I want to use a rifle. I need to use it the way that the game wants me to. So the personal bias hurts me in that, but I think a player coming in here with a more fresh mind, saying, okay, what do these weapons do in this game, would be better off than I was. This is where I started saying, like, if I look in a certain direction, can I change the way that I'm throwing the grenade? And I realized that the guy's pivoting on a static point, so I actually have to move into a certain place to get that flashbang where I want it. And at this point, I'm just wondering, of course, this being the first tutorial with the actual, I guess call them live targets. Nice randomization for those models, by the way. I think that's pretty interesting. Bit of a Hotline Miami vibe with a few of them. So at this point, I'm just kind of trusting the flashbang will do whatever it does, because there is no daze effect within the preview of the timeline, but there is obviously a daze effect once you play it live. And then me not knowing how long that was going to last, nor how well these guys were going to be at shooting. I did like the resistance I got there. It showed that I couldn't just like accidentally get right. I needed to actually plan this well enough. Maybe stay in the door for cover or get some more movement or something. But again, being who I am, I just start playing around with the various things. So started with a new plan. Also, when it comes to the plan UI buttons on the right, I do like the back button. So instead of dragging around, eventually learning like, oh, I can go undo, redo, like a Word document or an Excel sheet. I'm like, okay, that's great. As well as the trash button for throwing everything away. I think that UI is well planned out. And then the cone of vision that doesn't just go along the surface of the floor or the deck, that actually shows, okay, are they seeing walls? And gives you an exact point of knowing what your character can and can't see at points of orientation. I think that's very well thought out. And you know, the green doesn't seem to splice within the environment that I've seen so far, so I think it's a good color choice as well. This is where I started to do something wacky. I don't blame the game for this. This is just me. I saw smoke work where I could hide myself. I did not know how smoke worked at the moment. So I thought I would hide myself in the smoke and fire from there. Now that I knew, oh, the rifle may be more effective, but it takes time to aim. And obviously I was not really correct in either case, as I learned very quickly. The GIFs in between for loading screens, I think that's a nice touch. I assume that those are only there while the game is in pre-alpha state. But if they're going to be there all the time, so be it. Could be something that gets updated periodically as well. So understanding that I'm like, okay, let me take this tutorial seriously. I'm like, let me give myself less exposure to each target, and let's try to use that flashbang correctly. However, I'm still kind of stuck on my ideas in M4 or an AR and not the game's ideas, and I'm trying to look for some effectiveness that is not there. And again, I think I'm just crutching myself from having played other games with a similar style. And here I'm just going for, hey, kill them all real quickly, clean it up. I did make that mistake there. I couldn't see my line crossing over the other line. I don't think you could do anything about that as far as the UI goes. There's a little bit bumpiness there, and it shows what I needed to see. And so finally I saw, you know, okay, here's how you utilize the flashbang and go in immediately after it. The little step before it, not my best work, but is what it is. And then me just trying to look at the plan and see what changed. I think I decided to stick with the shotgun this time, just to see, hey, is this weapon a little bit more effective since it is the default weapon? No, I did not change that plan at all. And therefore I noticed, okay, rifle can be, or the shotgun can be pretty effective at these close quarters. Shotgun, to me, in my personal bias, is very effective at close quarters, but has a lot of pellets, and those pellets don't always go where you want them to go. So we used to say in school, like, you know, a rifle, it's if you miss, and a shotgun is when you miss. And that's what I carry into it with me in a game, but I'm flexible enough to know, like, hey, not every game is the same. I did see some shots going off of targets there, so I had to spend, like, you know, hostages hanging out with the hostile targets. I think to myself, okay, maybe a shotgun is not right for that role, and that especially comes more into play probably when I play the game later, but in the first mission where I had multiple people and I realized, like, oh, I have limited resources here. Also me looking at what I think is either a blue cuckoo mask or a falco mask. And then of course, nice fox, and what I thought might be a clown mask from one of the Joker's gang in The Dark Knight. But in any case, I was just appreciating the randomization, and I think this is an appropriate amount of character detail for this type of project. I would have liked to see a little bit more reactivity. Maybe that's something on the way. And that's something I say in like first-person shooters. But a little bit more reactivity upon first shots, you know, flinches, damage, something of that manner. Maybe they're not 100% dead yet, and I understand that. But definitely someone is hurting if they took, you know, 3 to 6 double-aught buck pellets to the shoulder and just maybe it stuns them for just a moment. Not a full moment enough to shoot, but definitely not for them to just fight back, unless we're assuming that everyone here is a hard criminal. So here we go with the tutorial where you hold control and you essentially freeze time at a moment so you can move everybody in sync. And this is where I had the most trouble just adapting to this. And that's because once I learned that a control button was there for that, I kind of abandoned the timeline at the bottom. And I am looking forward to going back in the game to kind of remedy that and readdress it. But I was excited to say, hey, I have 2 shooters now. Let me see what I can coordinate with them. And let me see what I can put together. So I'm worrying at this point because I realized that one of my guys can interact with the door. And one of those door interactions is to throw a flashbang. But I haven't yet come to understand, okay, how do I time that door opening with the other guy using the flashbang? And again, if I had understood, you know, hey, keep using the timeline, don't just keep holding control, I would be able to do that. Now here's where I had trouble understanding, you know, is it the inner angle that you're able to throw the grenade on better because you're able to reach your arm around there and chuck it? Or is it the outer angle that you're able to throw the grenade from better because it's just a straightforward angle in front of you? And I think with enough experience I get past that, but that's why I had a little bit of a hiccup there and I just decided to start over. I didn't play enough to see how do these guys interact with each other, like not pointing their weapons at each other or not shooting past one another, potentially accidentally shooting one another. Maybe that's something I'll catch since I'm watching this post-recording myself. And see here, I realized that, oh, I have had the timing wrong on the flashbang. I could have synced that up better. But again, once the control button was introduced to me, I kind of forgot about the timeline, and I didn't think to go back to it. I think with enough patience, just going back to that those features would work fine together. The trouble that I did run into is that if I am holding the control button, I need to only focus on movement sync, not orientation sync, and go back and do orientation later. You'll notice there's a few times where it looks like I'm trying to get an angle, or that I'm trying to orient a character, but I'm also changing camera angles. And for whatever reason, holding control opens up the right click to moving the camera at the same time that I'm orienting. Or maybe I just wasn't pressing on a character completely, but again, you'll see that a few times, and I'm not sure what that is. Again, no problem understanding, you know, what is the blast radius of this flashbang and what it affects. I did have trouble understanding, you know, what is the angle on these doors? Are these guys able to reach out from doors? Or is that only on the door open command? And again, I just had trouble timing all of this together, even though this is the tutorial to learn from syncing, but that's why we have tutorials. And then I'm just trying to do an old school cross breach with these 2 guys instead of button hooking them both, because I didn't like the play I was getting off of the combination of the gridded movement and the doors, and you'll see I get frustrated here and I just trash it. Hey, that's why there's a trash button, right? So I'm starting to understand here, okay, one guy has a door action, but after I've clicked that, I've kind of forgotten that I had a different character planned for that door. And so one of them's opening it. And see, there in the preview, we're shown that my guy's gonna get blasted by the flashbang and that he's not gonna have a good time. I don't remember if that shows for the live targets or not. And see, again, I'm having a lot of trouble just trying to see. The door looks open to me, and I don't know at what angle this guy can or can't throw it through. And you'll notice I get a little bit of frame slowdown here, and I think it's because I'm holding control the entire time while I'm also trying to orient these grenades, and maybe that's just too many inputs. at one time, but then the game gets, you know, nice and smooth again. For the most part, the experience was smooth, just these few moments. So here I'm trying to test the timeline. How quickly can I get those guys in there after the flashbang, where they're not blinded themselves? But again, I'm looking at the flashbang, no preview of the hostile targets being stunned. I don't think that's a bad thing. I'm sure it's something that'll be easily fixed, especially if it shows the SWAT officers already being stunned from their own flashbang. And we've seen, you know, the same preview of, hey, that guy's going to get knocked over from a fragmentation grenade. It was just something that kind of threw me off here. I was like, is my flashbang not affecting these guys? Is it not affecting them for that long? I just wasn't sure. So here I go for a much simpler version of the plan I was doing. Same cross, but no more running walls, I suppose. And then I just try to see if they can clean up the shotgun work. But one of my men does die, and the second one does die in that moment as well. It does seem that, you know, this is early, but maybe ending the mission upon failure like that, catastrophic failure, instantly, maybe that's not as good as, you know, giving it a few seconds to linger, just so the player can see exactly who fell and who died, and then bring up the, hey, mission failed screen. But I suppose that's why there's also a replay button. That's just thought that came to mind at the moment right now. And I don't mean to be overly verbose in this. I just want to offer every part of my experience, because I know that you're building a game that's, you know, you want people to enjoy, you want people to buy, spend money on. I hope that anything I say can be useful, but I also hope that I'm explaining enough of my biases so you can say, okay, that guy has a point, but I'm going to ignore that because that's just one guy. I know that every voice and every bit of feedback matters when you're trying to figure out for here. Now, these are points where, yeah, I was holding control, and I'm trying to orient this grenade, and I'm confusing myself between left and right click, and I end up rotating myself, and I didn't mean to. Yeah, right here. So I'm trying to orient this guy's look, but I'm also trying to keep him synced with the other guy. And I think I just didn't understand how sync worked. So if I go back and do this, what I'm going to try to do is just focus on movement first, orientation after, instead of planning every step as I go, including orientations. And I think that'll clean up that issue of me holding control, trying to orient a shooter at the same time moving the camera around. That, or just maybe having some block where it's like, okay, if you're holding control, the camera doesn't move at all. And then this is another portion where I was just like, you know what, I'm spending too much time on one portion of the game. I think I could plan this better if I tried, but I just wanted to move through and see what else the game had to offer, so I went for double fragmentation grenade. At this point, I realized that the training was over, and I saw the little message, adding more tutorials. I'm like, hey, great, it's good. New ways to move, new types of grenades, play with the lights, yeah, awesome. I noticed that I couldn't see the check marks there. I didn't realize, oh, there's a scroll bar, that's why. Whether it's my resolution or size of the window that I was playing, not really sure. I just realized, oh, I can scroll up, that's not a problem. I started looking, I was very interested to jump in a campaign, but I was kind of running out of time. So I decided what I should do is just go into like a training thing. Also, I was just looking at the amount of memes. This pre-alpha is flooded with memes, but I did want to make sure, like, hey, your wish list, go get the game button, that works, and it definitely does. So I said, let's go into blind training and do the type of training where you don't see targets presented to you, which means that orientation towards a zone instead of orientation towards a fixed point is what the focus was going to be. I figured that would help me just play more fluidly. Started to understand, okay, I have a team of guys to place here, since I didn't really know, like, okay, which portions do I go to? I was like, okay, I get to select these guys and select which positions they go to for this little building. This is the level later on where I ran into the problem. I've already presented the video with the soft lock at the end, but I just wanted to say that up front. So I figure I'll play this pretty safe, and I'll give each shooter submachine gun 2 flashbangs. It's not until I select the second guy that I realize, oh, there are not that many things to go around. What's in the armory has to be shared between everyone. And I thought, I don't know if that's gonna be permanent, but I know that I initially thought, oh wow, that's genius. We're gonna have limited resources. Now, if it's anything like some of the other games I played where you earn more weapons to unlock, then earning those limited resources to try and equip the whole team will be something to motivate the player. But if it remains like this, or hey, you have a static number of weapons to equip everyone with, and you can't just give everyone the best BFG weapon. Everyone has to have something for a role or a job. I'll be fine with that too, especially if shotgun breaching becomes a thing, or Overwatch with some of these rifled guys becomes a thing. I actually thought about that while planning this. I'm sure there are some in maybe some other missions, but one thing I noticed missing in this level and the other ones I played was a lack of windows. I like to post guys up on windows, especially if they're covering a major crossway, and just have them shoot. Here I didn't realize that, like, oh, I need to click a character and have them do something. On the one hand, you would think like, oh, if I automatically go to the character closest to that door to do the door action, then that would be more convenient to the player. But by doing it this way, you've given the player more control of saying, hey, maybe I want to send a guy across the map to do something while two other guys hold a position. And I think at the end of the day, even if that leads to a few accidents like that one I just had, I think that that's the better move overall. Again, coming around those doors, I understand why there's gridded movement, but it just, I never got really used to it. The smoothness where I just wanted these guys to come in the doors very quickly. And again, I lost complete control of the sync. This was the end of my playthrough. I think I want to go back and try to play better using the things available to me. At this point in time, I was not... I wasn't certain if I had my guy focus on that barrel if he would fire on it, and it would be, your classic red barrel of freedom with an explosive that reacts to a bullet. And I don't think I ever got to find out, but that was something that came to mind when I was orienting that guy. So my plan was to just plan one team at a time, give them both 2 rooms to go through from the onset of entry, get them all set to go into the last room at the same time, and hopefully avoid crossfire as much as possible. Maybe by sending one team in, having the other team stand by as a backup. But just having 2 men clear, one area at a time, very carefully, good orientation. And then I, set my guys up here to hold every entry they could. My plan with the purple guy was just to stand there with the rifle and see if anybody walks by towards my pink and yellow guys. Not my pink and yellow, but my more dull yellow and brighter pink. Sorry, I just realized there are 2 pinks and 2 yellows. And see, here I start to understand a little bit more of the timeline, but as I move a guy along his own path, the timeline also moves. Maybe if I go into gameplay options and find some option to say, hey, don't let me drag a guy along a timeline that's already established, let me do that by timeline. That might keep me from being as sloppy, but maybe I could just be less sloppy of a player. I'm not sure which is the better priority there. But what I do appreciate is the notion of saying, hey, there is a blind area here, and you have to figure out if there's anyone here you don't always know who's around. And then by having the opposite, I think giving that versatility is just what makes a game fun. So say, here's a lot of things you can do. Again, having a little bit of trouble with the forgetting to select the proper character for the area that I need. And thank God for this little undo button. That's great. I did find myself trying to control X a few times, I believe. I can't remember what my hotkey for undo is for my Linux console. Whatever I'm used to hitting for undo on my keyboard. Control Z, maybe? Or Command Z in some cases. I kept trying to do that here, and I don't know if I was inadvertently affecting the game like that, but just wanted to mention it. And here's where I come up with a little bit of problem with the soft lock as I'm planning this. I'll try to talk through it the best I can. So I'm trying to drag this guy to push him to the doorway at the same time as the dull yellow guy. I notice that he's not being dragged, and I notice that I can't select him and I can't drag anything else. Everyone has stopped moving as if time is frozen. I pretty much use this time to click every bit of the UI that I can, because I know soft locks do occur. What I couldn't understand was that I could still hear stuff in the background. So I thought, okay, maybe if I click through enough things, the screen will get refreshed, since something is obviously going on. So the game was still reading my mouse input at this point. It was getting clicks, it was getting null clicks for things I shouldn't be able to click on right now. You can hear the different sound effect. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But I couldn't really figure a way to get out of here. What I eventually did was hit Alt-Enter, thinking, hey, if I pull this out of the game, or if I pull the game into a windowed mode instead of full screen mode, maybe it'll refresh it, and that works with a lot of retro and indie games that I play. and that caused it to soft crash. So I've already submitted my log file. Let me know if you have any questions, and I do plan on playing the game some more, and I'll try to offer you as much feedback as I can. Maybe next time I'll just cut it in a clip so you don't have to watch an entire video, but this was easier for me to express all my thoughts. I know you wanted a few sentences. I typed that out in Discord. It was easier for me to express all my thoughts like this initially, and hey, as I grow more familiar with the game, maybe I'll be a better tester as well. But I do like to come in things with a fresh mindset of being the player that's gonna not understand and accidentally break things. So good luck to you, and happy development.